So we're now going to take our first look at R on our Studio desktop and look at what we need to do in order to get started using these two bits of software. So the first thing we need to do is we need to download R. So R is open source, it's free to use, it's free to modify. You can download it from one of the CRAN mirrors. So CRAN stands for the Comprehensive R Archive Network. So you can download it from one of these CRAN mirrors by clicking on this link, hyperlink in these slides. It's available for all kind of platforms you can think of. It's available for Mac OS, Windows, and Unix. I run R on our Studio on Mac OS and also using Ubuntu, which is a version of Linux. So I can help best with any operating system or installation issues you might have with either of those two platforms. R updates regularly. You need to actually check to see whether or not it's updated, and then you need to do the update manually. So I tend to stay maybe one release or so behind the current version of R, just in case there are any bugs or any issues. And I might check maybe just once every 3 or 4 months whether or not I should be updating things. So R itself is just the language, and if you actually ran R without any sort of interface, you'd basically get a flashing cursor and not much else. And for a long, long time, this was actually how most people used R. So it's obviously not very user-friendly, it's not very inviting. So what happened was a number of years ago, RStudio came along and they produced a desktop environment for actually working with R. And in this desktop environment, you've got a window up here where you can actually write all of your code. This is your scripting windows where you write your script. Down here is a window for just the odd command or so. Here is information about your folder structure. You can also click on the Packages tab and it'll give you information about the various packages you're actually using in your R environment. And up here is information about your environment, your version history, if you're using version control, information about that as well. So there's lots of nice information available to you in the RStudio desktop environment, which makes doing data analysis using R a much more pleasant experience than it used to be. So it's probably worth saying a few things about RStudio and their mission. So they recognize that all over the world, people, organizations are turning to R, Python, and other open source programming languages in order to make sense of data. RStudio talks about being inspired by innovation in science, education, government, and industry. And it's worth noting quite a few academics have got sort of affiliations with RStudio because of that nice interface between teaching and research at universities and the RStudio mission. So the mission itself is to create free and open source software for data science, scientific research, and technical communication. And we're doing this to enhance the production and consumption of knowledge by everyone, regardless of economic means, and to facilitate collaboration and reproducible research. That bit's obviously critical in the context of this unit, both of which are critical to the integrity and efficacy of work in science, education, government, and industry. So it's all about openness, it's all about open source software, and it's also about open and reproducible research. So the RStudio mission overlaps nicely with the open research and reproducible research mission. So you can download RStudio Desktop simply by going to their website. Make sure you download the free version. It's free forever, whatever operating system you're using. When you've downloaded it and you've kind of installed it, the first thing you're going to do is double click on the RStudio icon on your machine. And that's going to open up the RStudio interface. And the first thing I recommend you do is changing a few settings to ensure that every time you start RStudio, it's basically starting afresh. It's not remembering things from your previous sessions. So as these workshops develop, you'll be building lots of statistical models Some of them you'll be calling, model 1, model 2, whatever. Over the course of all of these workshops, you'll have many different statistical models that you'll probably be giving the same sort of names to. So you don't want RStudio Desktop to remember these sorts of things. So when you go to Preferences, or I think it's Global Options under some versions, make sure you uncheck this box here. So you don't want the R data information to be restored at startup, and you never want your workspace to be saved on exit. So change that to never. And that way, every time you start an RStudio session, it'll be starting afresh, so it won't have its memory clogged up by previous things you actually carried out. So you can customize the RStudio Desktop in lots of nice ways. You can move around those 4 panes that we looked at earlier. You can change the size of them. You can change the size of the font, if you like, by pressing Control or Command plus, or Control or Command minus will change the size of the font. You can also change the colors you want to use. So I tend to use one of the dark themes. I quite like using the Tomorrow Night Bright Dark mode, just because I find it a bit easier on the eyes when you're staring at the screen. So what's nice about the RStudio Desktop environment is you can really customize it so it works best for you. You know, the sort of font size that you want. You don't want to end up with eye strain, so you can change the kind of contrast of colors as well. So it's really customizable. So you can have a look now if you want to. If you want to pause this video, you can download R on RStudio Desktop and just play around with some of the customization. One thing I want to say also early on is that it's important that you keep your folders and your files organized in a sensible manner on your computer. I mean, this goes for anything, and it goes certainly for doing data analysis in psychology and related disciplines. Because you don't want to end up with a situation where your data files, your tidied data files, your analysis, your report are just spread all over your laptop across different folders, because it can be an absolute nightmare then to find those things again. You might think you'll remember where things are, but I pretty much guarantee you come back to it 2 months later, and it'll make no sense to you if you haven't structured things properly. So you don't want to make life difficult for yourselves. You don't want to find it hard keeping track of what folders contain what files. Because not only will it be difficult for you to come back to your own work, but then you also won't be able to share things easily with others, and you won't be able to easily do reproducible research. So luckily, there's a way in RStudio of creating projects that will actually organize your things for you. So whenever you start a new data analysis in RStudio, just go up and click on the New Project option. It's typically under the File bit of the menu bar. That will allow you to create either a new directory on your computer or to use an existing directory. And that will basically be the directory then that all the files you're creating for your particular data analysis, in this case, are kind of stored. They'll kind of link together. So within this new folder that you've created to store your .r proj file, which is kind of a link to where all your content is, I recommend you create a number of subfolders that kind of structure things too. So here's an example of a folder I've created called Andrew_project. Within that folder, there's my Andrew_project.r proj file. There are also a number of other folders. I've created a folder called raw data, which is basically my data in the CSV format in the rawest form that's maybe come out of electronic questionnaires, come out of the eye tracker, come out of a computer, EEG, whatever. I then got another folder which contains my tidied data. So I'll never modify the raw data here. Whenever I'm doing my data wrangling and data tidying, I'll actually save the result of that tidying and wrangling as a new data file. So I always want to make sure the raw data is the original data. I never touch that. So I've got a folder for my tidied data. I've then got a folder for my various R scripts. And I'm breaking my data wrangling and analysis into different stages. I'm going to have some code that's associated with tidying my data, getting it into the right format for analysis. I've got another one for visualizing my data. I've got another script for the analysis. We'll come on to R Markdown a little later in this unit. This is a way of producing nicely formatted research reports based on your analysis. So I might have another folder for the script that I use to do that. And then my final folder might be the research reports that emerge in HTML, PDF, whatever format. So I guess the thing to stress at this point is basically keep things organized, use the .r_proj files, because if you keep things organized, if you keep things well structured, it's really going to make so many other things easy for you.